Yes, sir. Do you want to? I can share with Doug.
That's fine. I happen to agree with your position on most of this, but I have a question about DTEs or your interpretation of the definition of the term capacity value. Can you, because it's changed over the years at most of the balancing authorities, due to intermittent resource working group pressures within those balancing authorities, the definition has gone from what's the minimum you can guarantee me you'll supply me between 3 p.m. and 7 p.m. in June, July, and August to what's the average you can supply me during those hours. And they're two very different things when it comes to system reliability.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And this is opening up an even more complicated aspect of an already complicated situation. As the gentleman described, there are different ways to define the capacity value, and it's been morphing. And as utility, as we've been trying to make our investments, whether it be renewables or not, we have to do so in a constantly changing regulatory environment. And one of those changing aspects is how do we integrate into the grid. So I can't give you the specific way of how we calculate it. I can, if you're interested.
We know how MISO calculates.
We use the MISO calculation.
It's an average.
Yeah. But if you wanted more detail, I certainly can get you in touch with the right folks on my team that can give you the specifics of that.
Let me just very briefly comment on that. I don't think we really disagree about the analysis here, of the need for capacity and how wind plays into it. I just make a couple of points. One is capacity comes in a variety of prices. And so coal and nuclear capacity costs a whole lot more than combustion turbine capacity. And so absolutely, if you add significant variable resources into the mix, you change the mix of dispatchable capacity that you also need to deploy. So I'm not suggesting that you just add wind and magically it works. I would acknowledge readily that you're going to have some balancing to do, and that in our case that's likely to come from three sources. Different scheduling of Ludington, as the variability of wind becomes perhaps more important than variability of load, at least on balance. Secondly, increasing transmission capacity over this 15 years between us and the plains should give some regional balancing. And thirdly, we almost certainly do add some quickly dispatchable gas capacity into the mix. And we've tried to account for that in our cost estimates. So,
Can I respond?
yeah, sure.
Thanks. So those three areas that you spoke of, using Ludington other than for daytime, nighttime arbitrage, instead using it to balance wind. I don't know what the profitability differences are for Ludington of doing that, and I haven't read your 300 words either yet. I'm sorry.
Fair enough.
But I'd like to, and my question may be a little bit naive because I haven't read those 300 words. But let's see, that's your first one is Ludington. Number two is transmission to the Great Plains. Okay, and number three is using a different mix of dispatchable resources because demand is not driving the variability of load. Wind is at 25%, clearly, and you're not going to cycle Fermi up now, right? So now you're at 80%, and 25% of it is wind, or 20% of it's wind, and 60% of it is, most of it's fossil, right?
Yes.
So my question to you then is, in your 1% cost rate in cap, do you specify, or does the legislature or the PSC specify whether the cost of transmission to the Great Plains, the cost of using Ludington differently, and the cost of a different mix of resources, does that all factor into that 1% cost cap?
My assumption is that it factors in. We do not specify exactly how those costs are done. We leave it for the legislature and the commission. My only point would be we'd want to be careful to actually look at the incremental costs attributable to this rather than sort of sweeping all costs of the future, because we're going to do some things anyway. So we just would want to be fair about that. Any questions?
The question I have is in relation to the NIMBY issue that you raised. As I can attest, and Mr. Doomering, if he's still on the phone, and the gentleman from Consumers can attest, that there is a significant contingent of the population that is not pleased with the notion of having a 493-foot tall turbine 1,000 foot from their door. That being the case, would you agree that it would be impossible to achieve the 25% with 3,000 new turbines under the local rule currently held in Michigan? Would it then be necessary to go to a state siting board in order to achieve that goal?
Do you want
Go ahead,
I don't think that's necessarily so. I think we would want to let it play out a while. I'm not personally advocating at this time that we have the state take over the siting. I'd rather see it be approached as, finding willing communities and, let it be worked out locally. The improvements in the technology open up a lot more space for us, and I think that's what gives us the opportunity to try to do it entirely through local acceptance.
Yeah, I think I would answer it was, I don't know. I can tell you that we have seen some incremental ramp up in folks opposing wind in certain areas of the state. Then you go to one township and you'll have folks that oppose it. You go to a township that borders it, and you're welcomed with open arms, and it's a better relationship. So I think every township is different, and when you start talking about placing that many wind turbines, I think ultimately you do probably have to get away from local jurisdiction and something broader. But I couldn't sit here and tell you for sure what the outcomes would be.
Hi, I was just wondering why you decided not to include energy efficiency in the 25 by 25 proposal, since some other states do, and what your reasoning behind that was.
Certainly, almost everyone in our coalition is in favor of energy efficiency, in fact, doing even more of it than we are today. Renewables as a broad category is something that most voters understand, at least to some extent. They translate it as wind and solar and biomass, that sort of thing. When you start talking about energy efficiency as a broad category, there are a lot of voters who think that means turning down the thermostat and being uncomfortable, and even worse, that the utilities will do it for them or the government will do it for them. So we chose not to make that a ballot issue, frankly. Now, I want to hasten to add, if you don't use the phrase energy efficiency or energy conservation, and in fact talk about the things that we do, like more efficient lighting, more insulation, etc., there's very broad support for that. So people are not opposed to energy efficiency when we're specific about what we mean, and it's what I think it means. They just don't get the phrase energy efficiency, and in the ballot measure we didn't want to do a whole detailed statute.